It was one of the darkest periods in all of human history, the Holocaust. An estimated 6 million European Jews were murdered by Nazi Germany between 1941 and 45, and we must never forget. Welcome to the Shalom Y'all Ministries podcast. I'm your co-host, Adam Keim, and I am joined as always by my friend and co-host, Dr. Daniel McCabe. Today, April 17th, 2023, is Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel. So we'll take a break from our regular format and do just that, remember. Today we have a special guest with us, Shelley Neese, who has lived in Israel for several years and knows firsthand what Holocaust Remembrance Day is like for the people of Israel. Shelley has also been keenly focused on Holocaust education lately in her role as president of the Jerusalem Connection International. Daniel has known Shelley for many years, so I'll let him introduce her.
Hey, thanks, Adam. And yeah, Shelley is definitely a long-time friend. Shelley, how long have we known each other?
I'm not one of those women that's afraid to give away my age, so I would say 25 years at least. I mean,
Okay.
I probably met you when I was 13 or 14. I'm 43, so
I would guess, yeah.
yeah, but definitely Daniel. I mean, I was a middle schooler when you when you walked into our lives at Moss Bluff Bible Church.
Right. I would think you were probably about 12, maybe 13. I think you were taller than me even then, though.
It's not hard to accomplish.
No, it's not. Well, let me add to the story a little bit here. Yeah, I've known her for a long time. I was her youth pastor for 6 years, and even for a couple of years after that while she was in college. So I got to see her take off from our small little community and head to the big city of Baton Rouge, where she ended up at LSU. But Shelley was really a driving force as I think back on things. She was a driving force of our first of many youth group trips to Mexico to do evangelism in several Mayan villages on the Yucatan Peninsula. I think it was, tell me if I'm wrong, Shelley, but I think it was you and Jenny and Andrew and Misty that went.
Yeah, we had a kind of like our small group within the youth group that, I don't know, looking back to maybe it was inception. You were probably planting the seed in our own minds and made us think it was our idea. So,
oh, don't give me too much credit.
You definitely jumped on board when we came to you with it. But I remember too, on one of those missions trips to Mexico, you confided in us. And I mean, this is my adult memory, putting it on my middle school memory, but that when you walked into our church as our new youth group leader, it was like, I mean, we were kind of a youth group of cool kids, and
oh, you were.
And so you walk in and you're thinking, I'm supposed to lead a youth group of cool kids, and I wasn't necessarily the cool kid in high school. So.
Oh, I'll be braver than that. I was about as far from the cool kid in high school as there was. My youngest, Luke, today even calls me a nerd because I like school and stuff. But yeah, it's...
So yeah, suddenly leading a group of cool kids, but we love Daniel as our quirky sidekick, our quirky leading sidekick.
Yes, that's a great description of me, and that's what I always tell people, that I was the quirky youth pastor, but I always thought that as long as I could convince you that the Lord loved you, and as long as you knew that I loved you, then I felt like at the end of the day I won.
And you did win.
Yeah.
And somehow through inception helped us to all realize that we were supposed to minister to the world and represent Jesus in the world, making us think it was our idea, even if we had some hand holding.
Well, very good. That's what I was after. Hopefully I did accomplish that and did that well. But in addition to, so many things, you were a tremendous softball player and student leader at Sam Houston High School. But Shelley also had a tremendous spiritual impact on the youth group, and I don't think she'll ever understand how much I really appreciated her influence. So, Shelley, thank you. But pick the story up there if you would, kind of after your high school years. Tell us where you went after high school. I've already kind of teased that a little bit, and then how you ended up in Israel. But be sure also along the way, tell us where you're living now and about your family, if you will.
Sure. So I went to Louisiana State University for the first 3 years of college, met the man who I married and who, well, I'm still married to 22 years later. Um, and we were standing in the LSU Student Union deciding what he was about to go to medical school. We weren't married yet, but we were starting to talk about it. I had 1 year to finish at LSU, and we got a piece of junk mail in the PO box at the LSU Student Union, and one of the pieces of junk mail was for a medical school in Israel in collaboration with Columbia University. And I always tell people it was the first and last piece of junk mail that ever influenced a major life decision.
Boy, it
And
did.
yeah, so we ended up going there. I went as a study abroad student for my senior year. I went over as a math and microbiology major, and the second intifada broke out about 3 weeks after we got there. And this is embarrassing, but I barely knew Israel was a Jewish country, much less anticipated being a religious minority, and definitely didn't know the difference between Hamas, Hezbollah, or the Palestinian, the Islamic Jihad. So I just could not get enough information about what was going on around me. Pizza parlors were blowing up from suicide bombers in Jerusalem. This is all pre 9/11, so even nobody had even wrapped their head around terrorism quite yet. And I quickly just dropped any math and science class that I had and was all in for Jewish history, Middle Eastern history, anything that could explain what I was seeing and the relationships that were happening around me. And also, on a personal level, just also learning about Judaism, which felt like I was on a fast track, having Shabbat dinners with neighbors and having to go to school on Sundays and having the Sabbath on Saturdays and going to church on Saturdays. It was just this really intense immersion experience in all things Judaism, all things Middle East, and all things Israel. And ended up going to graduate school there for a program called, it was a Master's of Arts in Middle East Studies. And it was unique in that it's the only Middle Eastern Studies program, or it was at the time, that you could study Israel within the context of the Middle East. Usually Israel's part of European studies programs. Like, nobody knows what to do with Israel in terms of, or at least the modern nation of Israel. How do you study it? It's this advanced Western nation in a lot of ways, but it's very Middle Eastern in other ways. And certainly that's where its neighbors are. And you just can't put it in any sort of box. So I really wanted to study Israel within its own context, which I felt like was through that program.
Awesome. Well, today we focus. I mean, we could talk about Israel stuff for an entire year.
Oh, for sure.
And we'd love to get.
And that's what we do on the podcast.
Yeah, it is true, and we'd love to chase every rabbit trail we could. But today we focus on Holocaust Remembrance Day. So, Shelley, what is that all about? What takes place on that day, and what is it like for Holocaust Remembrance Day in Israel?
Right. Well, so I like the way you worded that question, because there's two Holocaust Remembrance Days. There's an International Holocaust Remembrance Day in January, and that's important because it's the way the UN recognizes it. It's the way the world recognizes it, that we have one day on the calendar that we remember the darkest period in human history. Israel has a different approach to the Holocaust, I would say, even sometimes from the Jewish diaspora, in that they have Yom HaShoah, their Holocaust Remembrance Day, and it is closely associated with Israel Independence Day, so which will be in May, Holocaust Remembrance Day in April. On the Jewish calendar, they can kind of fall at different times, but they're always close together. And the idea is that the nation, the modern nation of Israel, was an answer to what happened to the Holocaust. Had there been the modern nation of Israel, we can sort of rehash history and think, could there, if the Jews had a place to flee to, what would have happened? How could this have been different? And a lot of Israel's even acceptance for citizenship is based off of that idea. What would the Nazis have defined a Jew as? Would it be their mother? Would it be their father? Would it be their grandmother? And so that's why in the modern nation of Israel, if you are Jewish, in the way that even a Nazi would define you as Jewish, not
Right.
necessarily religiously Jewish or both parents Jewish. You can immigrate to this country, you can make Aliyah and become a citizenship and not forego your previous citizenship. So it's different. And Yad Vashem reflects that as well, the Holocaust Remembrance Museum in Israel. If you notice, when you walk through Yad Vashem, it purposefully is a tunnel that ends looking out onto the Jerusalem landscape. And just this idea that something good came from those ashes, that it was Holocaust survivors who took up guns, retired guns from Czechoslovakia and put them to good use and fought for their freedom. And so it's a little bit different way to tell the story. Both ways are fine and both ways are good, but I actually think it's important that there's 2 Holocaust Remembrance Days for both ways to tell the story.
Yeah, I didn't know that when you came out through Yad Vashem. I've noticed, obviously, that it has a beautiful view following the horrors of what you just witnessed. But that was intentional, I guess, from what you're saying.
Intentional architecture, exactly.
Right. Well, I don't know why I doubted that, because everything about Yad Vashem seems very thoughtfully done. Do you have any personal experiences related to your time or times there? Anything that struck you when you first went, or anything like that?
Yeah, so one of my life dreams was to go to, there's a Christian leadership conference that's a week long at Yad Vashem. And I applied once for it and did not get it. It's compensated, and it's through the International Christian Embassy of Jerusalem and some other sponsors, but mostly it's through Christian Friends of Yad Vashem. And it was this devastating moment for me when I didn't get it. I mean, I was probably 30, so I shouldn't have been super surprised, but I just felt like if I haven't done the kind of things with my life that would be considered a lead-in to a Christian leadership conference at Yad Vashem, then I've got to readjust. I've got to do more things. I've got to do more
Gotcha.
Holocaust education. I've got to really lean into this. So I did. About 5 years later, I applied again and I was able to go. And I don't think I wore mascara a single day for those 5 days,
Oh
of just,
my.
I cried my eyes out every day. It was incredible, with all kinds of other pastors and leaders and organizational fellowship from all over the world. And the curriculum is set up really to focus on how to help Christians educate people on the Holocaust. And there's a pedagogy to it. They have a certain style and approach to that. And so some of it was the Holocaust and theology, the Holocaust, and having a rabbi come in and talk about how do Jews explain theologically the Holocaust. And obviously lots of meetings with survivors, including the youngest person on Schindler's List.
Oh my.
And, a personalized tour through Yad Vashem with people that work there and people that were behind a lot of the decisions that went into the intentional way that Yad Vashem does its displays. So it was just the most amazing experience. And where I came out of that was just realizing that Holocaust education can be catered to different audiences and to different groups of people and age groups as well. I mean, it's just such a hard thing to talk about. And so you really have to be equipped for how you're going to handle that conversation with different ages, with different faith groups, and with different knowledge bases. And I really appreciated what they were able to do and how you could kind of line those things up in your head. And so I've really been focused on Holocaust education ever since.
I remember a few years back, I discovered that Oskar Schindler was buried in a graveyard somewhere south of the old city, and I wanted to find. I've never seen the movie, but obviously I know the story. So my small group and we went hunting for his grave, and we finally found it. It was just such a striking moment when we saw all the rocks on top of his grave, symbolizing, I guess, what we would in America give as flowers. It was just a real moving thing to see the endearment they had for that man, and so many other men and women who helped during that time. Go ahead, Adam. I'm sorry. I'm kind of taking away from your next question. I think you had something you were going to ask her.
No, you're good. Yeah, I remember my first visit to Yad Vashem. It was very moving. You go, and I guess as an American, you kind of expect to see just everything about concentration camps and the experience there, but it was so much more. It was about the people. It was about the historical context. All that went into leading up to the Holocaust, its impact afterwards, and forming the nation of Israel. And it's more than just, horrid pictures of concentration camps. So, yeah, I would recommend anybody who travels to Israel, to Jerusalem, carve out time to visit Yad Vashem. Do whatever you can.
Oh, it'd probably take a minimum of a couple hours, but you could do it for days. You could
Yeah.
walk through that again
Absolutely.
and again.
So, Shelley, the Jerusalem Connection. What is the mission of Jerusalem Connection? How did you come to serve as its president, and what has your experience been like as the president of Jerusalem Connection?
So after we lived in Israel for a total of about 3.5 years, and when we left Israel, we moved to Boston. And in the beginning, I had a job with a group called Conflict Management Group, which was part of Harvard Law School, and they taught negotiation strategies to Israelis and Palestinians. And kind of some connections from professors that I had back in Israel, they helped me get that position. And the idea was that here's this Christian girl who seems unbiased because she's Christian. She's not Israeli or Palestinian. And so she'll be the perfect one to sort of help with these. I was more of an event planner as like a young graduate than anything else there, but also did some of the research at the think tank. And I never felt unbiased. I never felt honest about the position that I was holding there. And there was a moment that we were at a negotiation strategy meeting at one of these times that was very well funded because it was through Harvard Law School, that and a lot of Israelis and Palestinians negotiate together all the time. Water rights, electrical grids, all just the day-to-day logistics. Those are all being negotiated well and negotiated peacefully. So a lot of the people we worked with were people like that. But we were sitting in the American colony in Jerusalem, and a fight kind of broke out between the two groups. And they were, for the most part, friends, and it wasn't the worst fight in the world. But the Israelis said to one of the Palestinian negotiators, like, just declare a state tomorrow. Just do it. We did it. Just do it. We'll have to live with it. And there was a confessional moment on the part of the Palestinian, like, no, we can't, because then we would have to be responsible for that. And so I just realized at that point, I can't do this anymore. I am too biased to be honest in this position. And I think it's just time for me to sort of, I hope the best for the Palestinian people, but also I just feel better advocating for Israel's interest as well. And so I came back from that trip, and I was the first Christian to pass the security clearance to work at the Israeli Consul General's office in Boston.
Now, I knew you worked there. I didn't know that, though.
Yeah, I was. It was kind of a funny job too, because on a personal level, I was this little Southern girl who was suffering in Boston. I just could not make community. I couldn't figure out who my people were. And I'd been living in Israel 3.5 years and did not have that problem because Israel is very Southern in that sense. We would have cab drivers that would invite us over for Shabbat dinner, and our neighbors were immediately our best friends. And so I expected the same to happen in Boston, and it was not happening. It was just not my culture and my people. So it was also a little bit of a reverse culture shock, and that I also just needed to be with Israelis again. and the Harvard Law School environment, I was lonely. So that was another reason. So there was a professional and a personal reason. And it felt like going back home, just being with Israelis all day at work again.
Well, I'm glad God called me to the South. I much more enjoy the weather and the culture. It's just kind of what I know, although my family's from the Northeast, originally Pennsylvania. So I cannot imagine what it'd be like if you took me back to Boston or took me up to Adams, Minneapolis. I think I'd be lost too. And he tells me that many people that come up there for schooling have the same struggle that you had in Boston. So I can imagine it was very real. Well, I understand too lately that you have become even more involved in Holocaust education through your role at Jerusalem Connection. So tell us what you're doing and why you think it's important to do it.
All right. Well, so I forgot to say, so once, so we made a move from Boston to Virginia, and I made a phone call to Northern Virginia, so right outside of DC. I made an unsolicited phone call to a man named Jim Hutchins, who was a retired general and who had started Jerusalem Connection. I was 3 months pregnant with our first kid, so not always the best optics for a job interview. But he was married. His wife was a woman from Louisiana, a
Ah,
descendant of Huey Long. And so,
I didn't know that.
yes, so
Wow.
it wasn't even a question to him of whether or not I could do the job. He was married to a strong Louisiana woman who figured it out, and he knew I would figure it out. So he hired me with that risk, not really knowing how motherhood and this new position would work out, but he just knew that that part was up to me. And so for the next 15 years, his joke would always be, because we just added more and more kids from that point on, his joke would be if he had some big thing that he wanted me to start working on, he would just say, "Hey, Shelley, while you're resting, blah, blah, blah," like, let's do a giant event in DC or something.
Gotcha.
So I was originally hired as the managing editor because we had a printed magazine then became the editor, and then became the vice president. I mean, I've been with Jerusalem Connection for 17 years now. And then about 2 years before our founder and president died, Jim Hutchins, I took over as president, which was probably the most, in that board meeting, was probably the most like reluctant acceptance of leadership ever. Like, I was crying, saying I only wanted to do this with Jim, and I never, I didn't
Yeah,
want
but
to
he
do
believed
this
in you. Yeah.
by myself. And I like to be part of teams. I have no real ambition to head things, but maybe that's always how God wants it, or how God intends it. Reluctant leaders are often in the Bible. So I'm president now, and I immediately hired as vice president a woman named Amy Zayway, who is gifted in all the ways that I am not. I love to teach and I love to study, and she is really very good at the more practical, also business minded part of having a nonprofit organization. And she also focuses a lot, and I'm sure y'all should have her on the show too. She's fantastic, but she focuses a lot on the rise of anti-Semitism in the U.S. and the boycott, divestment, sanction movement. So a little bit more political edge. Whereas in the last probably 10 years, I've landed in a lot more of how modern and ancient Israel blend together. But so the man who hired me, Jim Hutchins, who passed away last year, his wife, Pat Hutchins, was an artist in DC, pretty well known in the area. And she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer and around 2016. And in the last 2 years of her life, she had began painting a series of paintings called the Auschwitz Album Revisited. And it was based off of an album that was part of Yad Vashem's collection, but it's the only photographic evidence of the selection process, because we didn't get a lot of photographs from the concentration camps. The Nazis were very good at hiding their tracks and not letting that kind of stuff be documented. And it's kind of a miraculous story how the album was even located. But once it was donated to Yad Vashem, they put it online. And through the Christian Friends of Yad Vashem, we were able to get access to the black and white photographs, high resolution. And what Pat did was zoom in on individuals. So the Nazis purposefully always dehumanized their
Gotcha.
victims.
Right.
And so you would see lines, hundreds of people separated into fit to work and not fit to work lines. And pretty much every picture in the album is from probably just a couple of days when one particular community from Hungary arrived to Auschwitz. So they're going through the selection process. They're going, being decided who's fit to work, who's not fit to work. And so she zooms in on one mother or one child or one rabbi. And it was a process for her of personalizing. And she was already did a lot of portrait paintings for people in DC. And so part of her idea was that she was honoring these victims through painting their portrait and painting their portrait how they would have wanted it. And a lot of interesting things came out in that process, because you would see a mom who was carrying a bag of bread, and you would just see in their eyes, they did not know what was about to happen. They had no idea. So that you would see a child that, you could tell the mom had sort of tugged the jacket sleeves down to cover her hands so they wouldn't be exposed to the cold. Like, you would just kind of notice all these details when you were painting them one by one.
That must be
And we
pretty
know, because
emotional
of
to
all of
do
the
that.
Holocaust memoirs out there and things, that just the more you can make this personal, the more you can honor the victims, the more people learn. So since then, we've really been focusing as an organization on teaching the Holocaust through art, through kinetic experiences. Pat ended up painting 40 before she passed away, and she had, the ovarian cancer was taking her life, but she would be on her hands and knees painting right until the end. So I just considered it part of my honoring of her legacy and Jim's legacy, who has since passed, of just getting these paintings in front of people. Of she painted them, but we sort of felt like it was up to us as an organization to use them for the purpose that she intended them for.
Now, we know that most people, unfortunately, won't have an opportunity to physically visit a place like Yad Vashem, and you've already mentioned some, but are there any other Holocaust-related resources, books, media that you could recommend to us and to our listeners to learn a lot more of the real story of the Holocaust?
So that album that I mentioned, it is all available online on Yad Vashem's website now. I can send you the link if you have show notes, but it is incredible because you can actually leaf through it like you would an actual album. And also, Yad Vashem has been focusing the last 2 years on individual stories, which they have done such a great job of just collecting over the years. But you can also go onto their website and just person by person look through people's stories, and the stories of the victims. And so really their website by itself is just a wealth of resources. And on a theology level, of God and the Holocaust, there's a book by Rabbi Irving Greenberg called For the Sake of Heaven and Earth. And he is a Jewish Holocaust theologian. And I think he makes this beautiful argument in the book that Christianity after the Holocaust reinvented itself, reformed itself in a way not contrary to the gospel, but in a way that held us to Romans 11, that held us to, what was originally written in our scriptures, that we are not supposed to gloat over the Jews, that God has a plan, a purpose, and a vision for the Jewish people, that he's not done with the Jewish people. And so this, he really goes into the history of the Second Vatican Council, but also just Christianity since that time, and the work that we have done so that Christianity can't allow for this again. It's not saying that Hitler was a true believer or something, but certainly we know Germany was a Christian country, that Martin Luther kind of was used in his end of life writings to help fuel those fires. And so I think it's just a really important piece of work for every Christian to humble ourselves and to do a little community repentance for any part that that our faith got sullied, that maybe led to the Holocaust being allowed to happen. And I know that's uncomfortable for people, but I think it's important to think about. So that's why I suggest that book, because I do think we've done a lot of work since the Holocaust, but it's important that work on a theological and biblical level keeps happening as well, of God's love for the Jewish people.
Yeah, for sure. We are to love them. The Bible tells us very directly that we are to bless them if we want to be blessed, and we should pray for them. And many of our listeners, and certainly the families represented here among the three of us and those in our circles, many people do really care about Israel in that way. I hope that more and more people will come to love God's people, and that's one of the basic fundamental purposes of our ministry is to love the people of the land of Israel. So, well, you're back in school now, right? Tell us what you're studying and how you hope to use your studies in the future, Shelley.
Well, so, the Middle Eastern Studies degree in my 20s, it got me up until the Ottoman Empire. So, I wanted to study Israel. I wanted to study Israel in its context. And that was important to study modern Middle Eastern studies. But I think just as I've gotten older, I realized that I I really wanted to know ancient Israel, that I really wanted to study ancient Israel in the biblical context. And try to connect those two, try to just, if the Jewish story is long and it's continuing through the modern nation of Israel, I felt ill-equipped on the story of ancient Israel and the prophets and, the Torah and just all of the setting that the Bible happened in. And so I went back to school originally just to take, I felt like I needed a class on Assyria and ancient Babylon, and I was just going to
Right.
audit it. I think I lasted as an auditor for about 3 weeks and then immediately asked the professor if I could just go ahead and matriculate because I already have a lot of spinning plates. I just do one class at a time. But also as an adult student, there's no better place to be. Just, you enjoy studying and learning so much as an
Oh,
adult.
Shelley, I got to warn you though, if you're anything like Adam and I think you are, it will never end. As soon as you're done learning what you're learning now, there will be more, and you will want to know more, and you will do what it takes to learn it. And it's a passion that we have, and it sounds like you have that same passion. So I do got to warn you
Absolutely.
though.
I mean, I treat at first I just wanted, I wanted the reading list, and
Right,
I always think, because we have to, part of the school program, we have to write down what percentage of the reading list that we
right.
accomplish, as an honor system. And I think I'm going to look like a liar because I always write 100%, but this is why I am doing this.
Yeah, you're like, I read them twice.
Exactly. Is that I want the readings. I want it so bad. And I also love to write. So I think the only difference between being an auditor of a class and, matriculating for credit was writing the paper and doing the test. And I delight in those things. So it just didn't make any sense for me to only audit. But I'm really enjoying it. It's through the Bible Seminary in Houston, actually. So I almost 100% am just telecommuting and just watching it online. But the provost of that university is the head archaeologist of the dig at Shiloh. And so it also feels like there's always kind of new and breaking news in class. And every summer, the students go along with other volunteers from across the world and participate in the dig at Shiloh. And so it also just feels kind of like a new and exciting place to be.
Well, speaking of writing, Shelley, I've heard that you've written a book. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Right. So I wrote a book called The Copper Scroll Project, and I'm an Enneagram 3. Like, I'm just going to be honest. I feel like I cannot study things without also producing something from it, So it's not any kudos to me as an individual. It's just how I process learning new things.
No, we understand that.
Okay, yes.
Yes.
But I always, as a spiritual person, you always sort of question your motives of, especially when it comes to Bible reading and Bible study, like, well, I'm doing this for my own personal growth, but I
Gotcha.
have to
Right.
be writing at the same time and processing it through
Right.
the
No, I
eyes of a
understand.
teacher. So the Copper Scroll Project is a very fun read about one particular Dead Sea Scroll called the Copper Scroll, which was in essence a 2,000-year-old treasure map. And one man named Jim Barfield who went in search of that treasure. And so the purpose of the book is also to teach the Dead Sea Scrolls. I wanted the reader to walk the streets of first century Israel, but also have have their feet on the ground in modern Israel. So like I said, my goal is always just to kind of connect ancient Israel to modern Israel in terms of how it connects in my own mind. And so I felt like the story of this copper scroll did that really uniquely. And so it was a story I had to write. I wasn't looking to write a book at the time, but it happened that way.
And the name of the book one more time?
The Copper Scroll Project.
Very good. Was there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know, or any last charge or words of encouragement, or something we should have asked but didn't?
Well, I think, just in light of Holocaust Remembrance Day, one thing that I would say is just, you don't have to feel like you are have a PhD in Holocaust studies to be able to bring educational opportunities to your community. One thing that I like about Holocaust education through art is that people looking at paintings and pictures, you don't need a speaker, that they're able to experience that in their own level, in their own way. Even after Hurricane Laura in Louisiana, there was a teacher who lost all of her copies of The Hiding Place. So Jerusalem Connection, so we sent new copies of The Hiding Place. And then when I lived in Fairfax, Virginia, where, it's kind of full of type A lawyers, we did, a kind of more of a heady, high level panel and that was with scholars and people who could engage that community in the messaging that they liked and the way that they absorbed new information. So I just feel like anyone can do Holocaust education in their community, and they can tweak it and make it apply to that community. One thing too that I did when I lived in Virginia, or was able to participate in, is, and Shalom Y'all Ministries would do this as well, is just, I think it's important to normalize Judaism and Christian communities. When I brought my kids, if you go to your local Chabad and go to their Purim events or their festival events, or you have Jewish friends in your life, it's also just a protection against that their different mentality that kind of led to a lot of the problems that led to the Holocaust. So one of the things that I considered like the greatest victory in parenting was when we went to the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. They have this area called Daniel's Room, and it's really to help process, the Holocaust Museum in D.C. is hard, and it's very hard for young viewers. And so the area outside is for those kids that probably just can't handle the inside material. And it's really just walking through a Jewish home, where they're lighting the candles on Shabbat, and they're celebrating the Feast of Festivals, and they have certain they have challah bread on the table. And so my kids walked through that room and they did not understand, they didn't see it as different. They didn't see it as unique. And they couldn't even wrap their heads around why people would feel entitled to hatred in that kind of environment against those kind of people, because it all felt so familiar, like a Christmas tree to a Christian kid. So I feel like that is a form of Holocaust education as well, as just by engaging the Jewish community around you and normalizing Judaism as part of your friendship circle and in your life.
Well, Shelley, our time with you has passed by far too quickly, and I know that there is a lot more we can learn from you and we can talk about. But listeners, we hope you enjoyed this Holocaust Remembrance interview with Shelley Neese. May we never forget, and may we thank the Lord that he keeps and preserves his peoples, both Israel and the church. Shalom, y'all.
Shalom, y'all.